Tariq Brooks was 35 years old, and until that Tuesday, he believed he had it all figured out. A senior project manager who'd spent 15 years building a reputation for precision, he was 3 months from launching a home staging business with his best friend Keith, funded in part by his late father's inheritance. His wife Andrea called him her rock, steady, predictable, easy to overlook. That afternoon, a mechanical delay rerouted his connecting flight, landing him home 6 hours early. He pulled into his driveway, ready to surprise her. Instead, he saw Keith's car parked in his usual spot. He sat there a moment, phone in hand, and texted Keith, "Where are you?" The reply came fast. A lie. Tariq stepped out of the car, walked to his own front door, and turned the key quietly. What he found inside would unravel a year of secrets, a fortune he didn't know was missing, and a friendship built on theft. But standing in that doorway, saying nothing, he made a choice that would change everything. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The last thing Victor said before he hung up was, "Don't let them rush you on the timeline." Tariq smiled and closed his laptop. "I never do." That was true. It was probably the truest thing anyone could say about him. Tariq Brooks ran projects the way some people ran marathons. Steady, patient, eyes always forward, never panicked, always 2 steps ahead of whatever problem was coming. At 35, he was the senior project manager at Callaway & Grant Architecture, and he'd spent the last 8 years earning that title the hard way, catching mistakes before they became disasters, keeping contractors honest, keeping clients calm. His boss, Raymond Callaway, liked to tell new hires that if Tariq was worried, then everyone should worry. And if Tariq wasn't worried, they could all breathe. Tariq was rarely worried. He zipped up his travel bag and set it by the bedroom door. The house was quiet in the way that early mornings always are. That specific stillness where everything feels paused, waiting. He did a slow walk through out of habit, turned off the kitchen light he'd left on, moved Andrea's keys from the counter to the hook by the door so she wouldn't spend 20 minutes looking for them. Small things. The kind of things you do for someone you've shared a bed with for 7 years, without even thinking about it. He and Andrea had met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. She'd been across the table laughing at something, and he'd thought she was the most alive person he'd ever seen. That energy. She still had it. She was sharp, ambitious, a regional sales manager who could charm a room into doing whatever she wanted without anyone realizing it was happening. He'd always admired that about her. Lately, though, something felt different. He couldn't name it exactly. It wasn't one big thing, it was more like a collection of small things that didn't quite add up. She'd changed the password on their joint savings app 2 months ago. Said the old one wasn't secure enough. That made sense, sure. But when he'd asked her to share the new one, she'd said she would, and then just never did. He'd let it go. He was busy. Then there was the week before last, when he'd caught a glimpse of her phone screen while she was texting. She'd angled it away so fast that for a second Tariq thought he'd imagined it. He probably had. He was probably overthinking it. He picked up his bag and sat on the edge of the bed. He'd tried to video call her last night from the hotel downtown where he'd stayed to get an early start on some pre-trip paperwork. It had rung 6 times and gone to voicemail. He'd waited 20 minutes and tried again. This time she'd answered, already in bed, looking tired. "Sorry," she'd said, rubbing her eye with the back of her hand. "I was in the bath. Didn't hear it." "It's fine," he'd said. "Just wanted to say good night." "Good night, baby." She'd smiled, but her eyes were somewhere else. Safe flight tomorrow. She'd ended the call almost before he could say goodbye. He'd held the phone for a moment after the screen went dark. Then he put it face down on the nightstand and told himself he was tired. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, as he poured the last of his coffee into a travel mug. A text from Keith. Heading into back-to-back meetings all day. Hit me when you land. Tariq read it twice. Not because the words were strange, but because Keith Daniels didn't do back-to-back meetings on Thursdays. Thursdays were his slow days. He'd said so himself, plenty of times. Sacred, Keith called them. He used Thursdays to work on their home staging business, the one they were building together. The one Tariq had poured real money into. His late father's inheritance money. The kind of money you didn't risk on someone you didn't trust completely. Tariq and Keith had been friends since their sophomore year of college. 15 years. Keith was the kind of guy who filled up a room the moment he walked in. Loud laugh, quick with a joke. The type who remembered everyone's name and made them feel like it mattered. Tariq had always appreciated that about him. Where Tariq was careful, Keith was bold. They balanced each other. Or at least, that's what Tariq had always believed. He typed back, "No problem, talk later." Then he grabbed his bag and headed for the door. The first flight was smooth. 2 hours, quiet seat by the window, and Tariq used most of it reviewing documents on his tablet. He was deep in a site specification report when his phone buzzed on the tray table. A travel alert from the airline. His connecting flight had been cancelled. Mechanical issues. He'd been automatically rebooked. Onto a flight already boarding that would land nearly 6 hours ahead of schedule. He'd be home before noon. He pulled up his messages and texted Andrea. Flight change. Landing early. Home by noon. Don't worry about cooking. I'll grab something. He watched the message. 1 check mark, then 2. She'd seen it. But the response never came. The drive home from the airport was 40 minutes on a good day. Tariq made it in 38. He kept the radio off. The silence felt right. He had the windows cracked just enough to let in the cool morning air, and he focused on the road the way he focused on everything. Steady, one thing at a time. He told himself he was looking forward to the surprise of it. Coming home early. Walking into his own house while there was still sun in the sky. Maybe Andrea would still be around if she'd worked from home today. Maybe he'd take her to lunch somewhere nice. That was what he told himself. But his jaw was tight, and he hadn't unclenched it since the airport. He turned onto their street. A wide, tree-lined road in a quiet suburb, where all the lawns were kept, and all the driveways were neat. And that's when he saw it. Keith's car. A black Audi A5 with a small dent above the rear left wheel well, parked halfway up his driveway, like it lived there. Tariq knew that car the way he knew his own shoes. He'd been in the passenger seat of it 100 times. He slowed down and pulled against the curb 3 houses back. He didn't pull into the driveway. He just sat there. Engine running. Eyes on the Audi. Back-to-back meetings all day. That's what Keith had texted him. Not even 7 hours ago. Tariq's hands didn't shake. That surprised him a little. He'd have expected them to. But they sat still on the steering wheel, calm and flat, while something cold moved through his chest and settled there like a stone dropped into deep water. He picked up his phone and typed, "Hey man, where are you right now?" He watched the screen. A minute passed. Then the little dots appeared. Still out at that Mercer job site. Long day? Why? What's up? Tariq read it twice. Then he put the phone face down on the passenger seat. The Mercer job site was on the other side of the city, 30 minutes away on a clear day. And yet Keith's car was sitting in his driveway. Right now. In the sun. Tariq sat there for a long moment and stared at the front of his house. The house he had picked out. The house he had negotiated the price on, reviewed every contract for, and repainted the shutters on with his own hands the summer he and Andrea moved in. It was a good house. He'd always thought so. He cut the engine. Got out. Eased the car door shut with barely a click. He walked on the grass instead of the path. Not because he'd made a decision about it. It was just what his feet did. The grass was soft, and still damp from the sprinklers, and his shoes were quiet on it. He moved around Keith's car without touching it. He reached the front door and pressed his palm flat against it for half a second, just a breath, before slipping his key into the lock. The door swung open without a sound. The house smelled like Andrea's perfume, the good one she only wore for occasions. Tariq registered that fact and filed it away the way he filed everything else. He heard them before he saw anything. Voices, low, then laughter, then nothing. They were in the living room. He stepped around the corner from the entryway, and the room opened up in front of him. The wide sectional couch, the big windows with the morning light coming through. And there they were, together. There was no other word for what he was looking at, no other way to read it. No version of this where it was something else. Andrea's head was turned away from him. Keith's face was in profile. Neither of them heard him come in. Neither of them looked up. Tariq stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds. He counted them without meaning to. It was just the way his mind worked, always measuring, always precise. He took in everything. The 2 glasses on the coffee table, Andrea's shoes on the floor, the way Keith's hand rested at the small of her back, like it had been there 100 times before, like it belonged there. 3 seconds. Then he stepped back, slow, deliberate, 1 foot behind the other, back through the entryway, back through the front door, which he pulled shut behind him with the same quiet click he'd used to open it. He walked across the lawn, got back in the car, put on his seatbelt. He pulled out of the spot on the curb and drove to the end of the street. Then he turned right and kept going. His hands were exactly where they always were. 10 and 2. Even. Steady. His eyes were dry. The stone in his chest hadn't moved, but it felt heavier now. Not because of the grief, though that was there too, sitting just beneath the surface like something waiting. It felt heavier because something else had settled in alongside it. Clarity. Complete, cold, total clarity. He drove, and he thought, and his hands never once left the wheel. The hotel room was a standard double on the 4th floor. Clean, quiet, and completely forgettable. Just the way Tariq needed it right now. He set his bag down by the dresser and sat on the edge of the bed without taking off his jacket. The overhead light was too bright. He switched on the lamp on the nightstand instead and sat back down. The room went a little softer, a little smaller. He sat with his phone in both hands and stared at the screen without unlocking it. Outside, a car moved through the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across the curtains for a second before disappearing. Then it was quiet again. He thought about Keith's hand, the way it rested against Andrea's back. Easy, natural, like muscle memory. How long does something take, he thought, before it feels that easy? He unlocked his phone. He didn't text Andrea. He didn't call Keith. He sat for another minute, running numbers in his head the way he always did when a project had gone sideways. Not panicking, just assessing. Identifying the gap between what he'd believed was true and what the evidence was actually showing him. The gap was wide. He didn't know yet how wide. He found Victor's number and pressed call. It rang twice. Tariq. Victor's voice was even, unhurried. That was the thing about Victor. He never answered a phone like it was an interruption. He answered it like he'd been expecting you. Thought you were in Columbus until Thursday. Flight situation, Tariq said. Got rerouted home early. A short pause. Okay. I've got some questions. Legal questions. I need you to answer them straight. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm listening. Tariq looked at the curtains. In this state, if someone wanted to protect personal assets coming into a divorce, specifically inheritance funds, money that came before the marriage, how protected are those? Victor didn't answer immediately. Tariq could hear him settling somewhere quieter, a door closing softly in the background. Depends on whether those funds got commingled, Victor said carefully. If inheritance money sat in a separate account and never got mixed in with joint finances, it's generally protected. If it got moved into a shared account, used for joint expenses, that gets murkier. He paused again. Why are we talking about inheritance funds, Tariq? I'm asking hypothetically. You're not, though. Tariq was quiet. Talk to me, Victor said. The lamp on the nightstand buzzed faintly. Tariq listened to it for a second. I came home early today. Keith's car was in my driveway. He stopped. He didn't need to say the rest. He figured he wouldn't have to. He was right. Victor was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice hadn't changed in volume, but something underneath it had shifted. Gone a little harder. How sure are you about what you saw? Completely. Okay. One word. Flat, and final, and loaded. And you didn't say anything to either of them? No. Good, Victor said, and the steadiness of it, no hesitation, no performance of shock, settled something in Tariq's chest. That's good. Don't. I'm not planning to. Tariq leaned his elbows on his knees. I need to know how long this has been going on. I need to know what else I don't know about. And I need to know exactly where my money is before I do anything else. The inheritance account, I need to know if anything's been moved. I haven't had a reason to look closely. I do now. Victor exhaled slowly. Okay, I can help you with that. But Tariq, listen to me. Don't access anything jointly held and start moving funds on your own. Not yet. That can get used against you. We do this right. That's why I'm calling you instead of doing it myself. I know. A beat. What about the business? That too. Tariq stood up and walked to the window. He pulled the curtain back an inch. Just the parking lot. Just the amber wash of the streetlights. If a partnership needs to be dissolved, what does that look like when one partner has also committed a personal breach of trust with the other partner's spouse? Does that factor in? Not automatically, Victor said. But if there's financial misconduct tied to the business, commingling, misuse of funds, that's a different story. That gives us teeth. He paused. Is there something specific you're already suspecting? Not yet, Tariq said. I'm just making sure I understand the whole board before I make a move. Victor was quiet for a moment. When did you get so patient? I've always been patient, Tariq said. People just don't notice. They talked for another 20 minutes. Tariq asked questions. Victor answered them. No speeches, no expressions of outrage on his behalf. Just information, laid out clean and precise. Exactly what Tariq had needed. By the time he hung up, he had a short list of things to quietly verify, a clear picture of what he could and couldn't do without tipping his hand, and the beginning of something that felt less like a plan and more like a foundation. He didn't sleep much. He lay on top of the covers with the lamp off and the room dark, and he stared at the ceiling and mapped it out. Not emotionally, methodically, the way he'd lay out a project timeline, phase by phase, dependency by dependency, with every step designed to reduce risk and maximize outcome. By 3 in the morning, he had the shape of it. By 5, he'd stopped trying to sleep and showered instead. He pulled into his driveway just after 9 the next morning. Andrea was in the kitchen when he walked in. She was in her work clothes, a blazer, her hair pulled back, with a travel mug in her hand and her laptop bag on the counter, clearly about to leave. She looked up when she heard the door and went very still for just a fraction of a second. Just a flicker. Tariq caught it. He filed it away. His face gave her nothing. "Hey," he said, dropping his bag by the door. Easy. Casual. Surprised. Andrea blinked, and the flicker was gone, replaced by something that looked like relief, dressed up as warmth. She smiled and crossed the kitchen toward him. "You're back early. What happened?" "Shortened the trip," he said. He accepted the quick kiss she pressed to his cheek, his face still relaxed, his eyes steady. "Wrapped up what I needed to. Didn't see a reason to stay the extra days." "You should have told me," she said, turning back toward the counter. "I would have made breakfast." "Don't worry about it." He moved past her to the refrigerator, opened it, scanned the shelves like a man who was simply hungry and nothing more. "I'll grab something. You heading out?" "Yeah, I've got a regional call at 10. She picked up her laptop bag. "I'm glad you're home, though." She said it the way people said things they'd rehearsed without meaning to rehearse. Smooth, but a little too smooth. "Me too," Tariq said. He watched her go. He listened to the front door close. He stood in the quiet kitchen with the refrigerator still open and the cold air spilling out around him. Then he reached for his phone and texted Victor 2 words. "I'm ready." The next few days, Tariq moved through his life like nothing had changed. He woke up when the alarm went off. He made coffee. He sat across from Andrea at the kitchen table in the mornings and asked about her day, listened to her answers, and gave her nothing to read in his face. He was good at it. He'd always been good at managing the surface of things while working underneath them. That was, after all, what he did for a living. At work, he was focused, precise. He ran his project reviews, responded to his emails, and sat through his Tuesday planning meeting without a single thought, showing that didn't belong there. But underneath all of it, he was watching. He watched Andrea's phone screen tilt away from him when she scrolled. He watched the way she answered certain calls from another room. He noted the times, the patterns, the small adjustments she made without realizing she was making them. None of it was dramatic. None of it looked like guilt to someone who wasn't paying attention. Tariq was paying attention. It was Wednesday afternoon when Bree caught it. Tariq was at his desk, working through a set of revised floor plans, when she appeared in his doorway and knocked twice on the frame. Bree Sims was the kind of person who always looked like she'd already thought through what she was about to say. She was methodical, quiet, and sharper than most people in the building gave her credit for. She and Tariq had worked alongside each other for 4 years, and in that time he'd learned that when Bree had something to tell you, it was worth stopping what you were doing. He set his pen down. She stepped inside and pulled the door halfway closed behind her. She had a printed email in her hand, folded once. She held it like it was something she wasn't sure what to do with. "So," she said, keeping her voice low, "you know the Henderson Project Cloud folder? The shared one we set up in January for the cross-departmental review?" "Yeah. Somebody synced a personal Google account to it by mistake a while back." She paused. "Looks like it pulled in some files it wasn't supposed to. Old stuff. I was cleaning it out this morning, and I found a thread that—" She stopped. "It has your wife's name on it." Tariq looked at her. He didn't move. Bree held out the folded paper. "I printed the first page before I really understood what I was looking at. I didn't read past that." She met his eyes. "I thought you should know." He took the paper from her hand. He didn't open it yet. "You didn't forward it anywhere?" "No." "You didn't say anything to anyone else?" "No, Tariq." Her voice was steady. "I came straight here." He nodded once. "Thank you, Bree." She held his gaze for a second, then gave a small nod and left, pulling the door behind her until it clicked shut. Tariq sat still for a moment. Then he unfolded the paper. The email at the top was from Andrea's personal address to Keith's. The date on it was 14 months ago. He read it once, carefully. Then he pulled up the shared folder on his computer, found the full thread, and read it from the beginning. He read the whole thing without moving from his chair. It went back further than 14 months. The earliest message in the thread was nearly 18 months old. The tone of it was easy and familiar in a way that didn't happen overnight. Inside references, private language, the casual rhythm of 2 people who had already stopped pretending the thing between them was new. There was a hotel confirmation embedded in the thread. A boutique hotel in Charleston. 2 nights. The dates matched exactly with the trip Andrea had told him was a regional sales conference. The trip he'd paid for as an anniversary gift because she'd mentioned she'd need to cover it out of pocket, and he'd wanted to do something nice. He remembered thinking it was a good idea. He remembered feeling like he'd gotten something right. The reservation was in Keith's name. He read that part twice. Then he closed the folder, leaned back in his chair, and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It wasn't one night that spiraled. It was a year and a half of deliberate choices, made over and over again. While Tariq sat across from both of them at dinner tables and birthday parties and Sunday afternoons, trusting completely. The anger was there. He could feel it, low and heavy, sitting in the center of his chest like a stone. He didn't move it. He just let it sit there. After a while, he picked up his phone and stepped out of the office, walking down to the far end of the hallway near the stairwell where it was quiet. He called Victor. Victor picked up on the second ring. "Talk to me." "It's been going on for at least 18 months, Tariq said. His voice was flat and even. "There's a paper trail, emails, hotel records. I have documentation of a trip I personally paid for that they used together." A pause. "How solid is the documentation?" "Solid." "Okay." Victor's voice dropped half a register. "What do you need?" Tariq looked down the empty hallway. "I need everything, Victor. Not just this." Victor's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, quiet and well-organized in a way that matched the man himself. Dark wood shelves, clean desk, a single framed photo of his mother on the windowsill, everything in its place. Tariq arrived at 7 in the morning, before the building's other tenants had started filtering in. Victor had the door unlocked and a pot of coffee already made. No small talk. They both knew what this was. The boutique business, the home staging venture Tariq and Keith had been building for the better part of 2 years, had its own set of financial records separate from Tariq's personal accounts. Operating costs, equipment purchases, a small marketing budget, early vendor contracts. Tariq had handled the capital side of things. Keith had handled the client relationships. That was the division they'd agreed on. Tariq spread the account statements across the conference table. Victor put on his reading glasses, pulled his notepad close, and got to work. For a while, the only sounds in the room were the soft scratch of Victor's pen and the occasional turn of a page. They worked methodically, the way they always did, moving through the records quarter by quarter, flagging inconsistencies, checking figures against receipts. It was Victor who stopped first. He didn't say anything right away. He just pulled one of the statements closer, tilted it slightly under the light, and looked at it for a long moment. Then he reached for a second page and held it beside the first. "Tariq," he said. Tariq looked up from across the table. Victor didn't hand the papers over. He laid them flat and turned them around so Tariq could read them straight on. "This account here." Victor tapped the top of the first page. "The one ending in 741. That's the inheritance account. Your father's funds." "Yeah." Tariq had set it up 2 years ago, after his father passed. The money was meant to sit there until the business was ready to be fully capitalized. His father had worked 35 years in the trades. The money meant something. "What about it?" "There are 11 transfers out of this account over the last 16 months, Victor said. His voice was even, but careful. "They're spread out, small enough not to trigger an automatic alert. Between 800 and 2,200 each time." Tariq looked at the figures. He did the math without reaching for a calculator. "Just over $19,000. Gone." "Where did it go?" he asked. Victor set a third page down beside the first two. "A joint checking account. One that has Andrea's name on it as primary holder." He paused. "But this account isn't one you share. The address on file is a P.O. box. You didn't open this with her." Tariq stared at the page. Victor continued. "I traced where the funds moved from there. Most of it went out within a few days of arriving. Payments to 3 different creditors." He laid down a fourth sheet, a summary he'd handwritten himself. Clean columns, clear numbers. All 3 creditors are tied to Keith Daniels. The room was very quiet. Tariq picked up the summary and read it. He read it the way he'd read everything else in the past week, carefully, without rushing. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes went still in a way that was different from calm. His father's money. He'd spent the weeks after the funeral making sure those funds were protected, filed correctly, put somewhere safe until they could be used for something real, something that would last. He'd told Andrea about the account because he trusted her, because she was his wife, because that was what you did. And she had walked into that account, quietly, over 16 months, and drained $19,000 out of it. Not for herself, not for the household. She had moved that money, piece by careful piece, and used it to cover the debts of the man she was sleeping with. Tariq set the paper down on the table. He pressed it flat with 2 fingers, very deliberately, the way he pressed down a drawing that had been rolled too long. "I need a minute," he said. Victor didn't move. He just sat back and let him have it. Tariq stood and walked to the window. The city was waking up below. Delivery trucks, early commuters, the kind of ordinary, indifferent morning that didn't care at all what was happening on the 14th floor. He stood there until the stone in his chest settled back down to somewhere he could breathe around it. Then he turned. "Okay," he said. He sat back down. He picked up the summary again and looked at the creditors. "How long until you can put together a clean legal record of all of this? Transfers, account history, all of it." "A week," Victor said. "Maybe less. Do it." Tariq set the paper back down and looked at Victor across the table. "And when you're done, I need you to dig into the investor relationship. The outside partner Keith brought in for the staging business." Victor's pen stopped moving. "Why?" Tariq's voice was quiet. "Because nothing I've found so far has been the whole story. And I don't think Keith pulled all of this just to cover some debts." Victor made the call that same afternoon. He kept it simple, professional. He told Keith's investor contact, a man named Roland Fitch, who ran a small private equity group out of the suburbs, that he was conducting standard due diligence ahead of the formal partnership agreement. Standard language, the kind of thing nobody argues with when a lawyer says it. Fitch's assistant sent the documents over within 2 days. Victor called Tariq on a Thursday evening and told him to come in the next morning. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. The way he said it was enough. Tariq was there at 7 again. Same time, same pot of coffee. But the feeling in the room was different this time. Heavier. Victor had the documents already printed and separated into 3 neat stacks on the conference table, each one held together with a binder clip. He didn't hand them over right away. He sat down across from Tariq, folded his hands on the table and looked at him the way a doctor looks at a patient before delivering results. "I need you to hear me before you read these," Victor said. Tariq sat back. "Go ahead. What's in these documents isn't just about the money anymore." Victor picked up the first stack and set it in front of him. "Keith has been in private talks with Roland Fitch for at least 6 months. He's been pushing a restructuring proposal, one that removes you from the ownership structure entirely." Tariq didn't reach for the papers. On what grounds? Mismanagement. Victor said the word flat. No cushion around it. Tariq was quiet for a moment. "Show me." Victor slid the second stack across the table. "These are expense reports Keith submitted to Fitch as part of the restructuring pitch. They show a pattern of what looks like careless spending on your end, overages, unexplained withdrawals, a couple of vendor payments that don't match your actual contracts." Tariq picked up the stack and went through it page by page. He turned each sheet slowly, reading the figures the way a man reads something in a language he knows well but wishes he didn't. He recognized the numbers. Not all of them, but enough. Some of the account details. The formatting of a few line items. The way certain figures had been pulled and then placed slightly out of context. Just enough to tell a different story to someone who didn't know the original. "These came from my accounts," Tariq said. His voice was level. "The figures. Someone pulled the real numbers and then adjusted them." "Yes." Victor opened the third stack. Andrea had access to your personal accounts. She's had access for years. These figures match your actual account activity. But they've been stripped of context, rearranged, and given to Keith, who then repackaged them and sent them to Fitch as evidence of your incompetence. Tariq put the papers down. He sat very still. He had spent the last several days holding things in separate categories in his mind. The affair was one thing, the inheritance money was another. He had been keeping them apart, almost by instinct, the way you separate damage reports before you assess the total. But they weren't separate. They had never been separate. Keith hadn't stumbled into an affair with Andrea. Andrea hadn't quietly stolen from an inheritance account out of impulse. This was a structure, a plan. Keith needed Tariq out of the business. Andrea gave Keith access to the financial records that made the case against Tariq look real. And while Tariq was traveling for work, trusting both of them, believing he was building something, they had been systematically using everything he gave them, his money, his trust, his access, to dismantle him from the inside. The affair wasn't the betrayal. The affair was the tool. Tariq stood up from the table. He walked to the window, same as before. The city was the same. The ordinary, indifferent morning was the same. But something had shifted in him. Whatever had still been soft in his chest, the part that had hoped, at some level, that there was a limit to it, was gone now. In its place was something harder, cleaner. He thought about his father. The 35 years, the money sitting in that account like something protected. He thought about 2 years of building a business he believed in, every vendor call, every budget line, every late night reviewing plans while Andrea sat 20 feet away, and Keith texted her from across town. He turned around. "Victor," he said. Victor looked up from his notepad. "We're done watching." Tariq walked back to the table and sat down. He didn't look at the papers anymore. He looked at Victor. "I want everything we have turned into a case. A real one. Every transfer, every doctored report, every piece of investor correspondence. I want it built tight enough that when we bring it out, there's no room for either of them to move." Victor studied him for a moment. "That means we start with the divorce filing," Victor said carefully, "and a civil claim for the inheritance funds. And we need to think about how we handle Fitch." "I know." Tariq's voice was steady, quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. "Start with all of it, all at once." Victor nodded once. He uncapped his pen. "Then let's get to work," he said. The next 10 days were quiet ones, not peaceful. Quiet is different from peaceful. Peaceful means you aren't carrying anything. Quiet means you're carrying everything and choosing not to let it show. Tariq carried it well. At the firm, he and Bree worked during lunch breaks and after hours, pulling records from the shared cloud drives with the kind of careful, unhurried focus that looks like routine work to anyone passing by. Bree had a gift for that. She could make anything look like paperwork. She pulled every file that touched the staging business, shared vendor folders, project cost logs, anything Keith had forwarded through channels connected to the firm's cloud. She cross-referenced the doctored expense reports Victor had received from Fitch's office against the originals sitting in Tariq's own account records. The differences were small, deliberate. Someone had gone through the real numbers and adjusted them just enough, moved a decimal, dropped a vendor credit, inflated a withdrawal by a few $100s. Small lies stacked on top of each other until they added up to a story. A story where Tariq looked careless, where the money going missing looked like his fault. Bree laid the two versions side by side on her screen one afternoon and turned to Tariq. "It's all here," she said. "Every change is documented. Original timestamp on your records. Keith's submitted version to Fitch, the date it was sent. We've got a clean line from one to the other." "How clean?" Tariq asked. "Clean enough that a first-year accountant could explain it to a jury." He nodded. "Good. Victor built the legal side of it with the same precision. The civil claim for the inheritance funds was drafted and ready. The divorce filing was prepared, signed, and sealed, waiting only for Tariq's instruction to file. Victor had also pulled the full chain of correspondence between Keith and Roland Fitch, including 2 emails where Keith had explicitly described Tariq as a liability to the project's long-term viability, and suggested that removing him before the dinner would protect everyone's investment. Before the dinner. That was the first time Tariq heard about it. He was sitting in Victor's office, reading one of Fitch's replies, when the phrase appeared. "What dinner?" he asked. Victor looked up. Keith scheduled it, 3 weeks out from the date of that email. Private dinner with Fitch and 2 of his associates. The intention, based on these documents, was to finalize the restructured ownership agreement and sign the new paperwork. Keith planned to present it as a done deal. Tariq read the date on the email again. The dinner was in 4 days. He leaned back in his chair. A slow breath in. A slow breath out. "Does Keith know we have any of this?" "No," Victor said. "He requested the due diligence documents himself, remember? He thinks I'm processing routine partnership paperwork. He has no reason to believe anything has changed." Tariq was quiet. "Then we go. To the dinner." Victor studied him. "As a co-owner." "As a co-owner," Tariq confirmed. At home, Andrea had gotten comfortable. That was the word for it. Comfortable. She moved around the house with a looseness she hadn't had in months, talking more, laughing easier, leaving her phone face up on the counter when she left the room. She had read Tariq's stillness as safety, his calm as ignorance. She thought the version of him that came home from that shortened trip was a man who suspected nothing. She was wrong, but Tariq let her believe it. He noticed things. A printed itinerary left on the kitchen table one evening. A restaurant name, a date, a time, written in Andrea's handwriting, with Keith's initials at the top. He photographed it with his phone and said nothing. He noticed a text preview on her unlocked screen one night when she stepped outside to take a call. He didn't read the full message. He didn't need to. The sender's name and the first 6 words were enough. He photographed that, too. He sent everything to Victor. Victor confirmed it matched the dinner date in Fitch's correspondence and added it to the folder. The folder. By the end of the 10th day, the folder was complete. Victor had it bound and tabbed in his office. Paper copies for the meeting. Digital backups on 2 separate encrypted drives. Bree had verified the digital trail one final time and sent Tariq a single text that read, "Airtight. Nothing missing." That night, Tariq sat at the kitchen table after Andrea had gone to bed. The house was still. The only light was the small lamp above the table. He opened the folder. He went through it the way he used to go through project plans the night before a big presentation. Page by page, unhurried, checking each section the way a man checks something he already knows is right, but needs to feel certain about anyway. The bank transfers. The original account records beside the doctored versions, the investor correspondence, the emails naming him a liability, the itinerary in Andrea's handwriting, the divorce filing, the civil claim. All of it, right there. He closed the folder. He set his hand flat on the cover and held it there for a moment. Then he turned off the lamp and went to bed. The restaurant was the kind of place that tried hard to look like it wasn't trying. Dark wood panels, low lighting, tables spaced far enough apart that you could have a private conversation without leaning in. Roland Fitch had picked it. That was obvious. The man had a taste for spaces that made money feel comfortable. Tariq arrived 5 minutes early. He wore his charcoal gray suit, the one he saved for presentations where the numbers had to speak louder than the room. He carried a slim leather portfolio under his arm. Inside it were 12 pages of tabbed documentation, printed cleanly on white paper, organized in the order he intended to use them. He did not look like a man who was about to do anything unusual. The host led him to a private dining room in the back. Round table. 6 chairs. 2 of Fitch's associates were already seated. Men in their 50s, both with the kind of careful, measured expressions that come from decades of watching deals go sideways. Tariq shook their hands, remembered their names, sat down. Roland Fitch arrived 2 minutes later. Tall, silver-haired, the handshake of a man who had practiced it. He greeted Tariq warmly, the way you greet someone you've already planned to disappoint. Keith came in last. He was smiling when he walked through the door. That wide, easy smile he'd had since college, the one that made people feel like they were already included in whatever he was about to say. He was wearing a new suit, dark blue, sharp. He looked like a man who believed the evening belonged to him. He saw Tariq, and the smile held, just a half-second too long. Tariq. He extended his hand. Didn't know you were coming in tonight. You didn't ask, Tariq said simply. He shook the hand. Firm, brief. Keith laughed. Easy. Practiced. He took the seat directly across from Tariq and turned his attention to Fitch, and the pleasantries began. The table talked for 20 minutes. Dinner was ordered. Wine was poured. The 2 associates asked questions about the staging business's current projects. Tariq answered them directly, citing numbers from memory, and watched the associates nod with genuine interest. Keith watched too. His smile never moved, but his eyes tracked Tariq the way you track something you don't fully understand. After the appetizers were cleared, Fitch set his napkin on the table and looked at Keith. Should we get into it? Absolutely, Keith said. He reached for his own folder. He talked for 4 minutes. Clean and confident. He described the business's growth potential, the current market position, the exciting path forward. And then, smoothly, almost gently, he arrived at the restructuring proposal. He used the word streamline. He talked about the importance of aligned leadership and unified decision-making going into the next phase. He talked about the need to ensure the business presented a strong financial profile to future investors. He set a printed summary in front of Fitch and slid copies to both associates. And then he said Tariq's name. He didn't look at him when he said it. He looked at Fitch. He spoke carefully, using phrases like some concerns about oversight and inconsistencies in the account records and liability to the project's long-term viability. His voice stayed measured and professional, the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis he's rehearsed. Tariq let him finish. The table was quiet. Then Tariq opened his portfolio. I want to make sure everyone here has the full picture, he said. His voice was calm, conversational, like he was clarifying a timeline on a project plan, because some of what Keith just described isn't quite accurate. He placed the first set of documents in front of Fitch, 2 pages, side by side. These are the original expense reports for the staging business. These, he set the second set beside them, are the versions Keith submitted to you, Mr. Fitch. If you compare the figures on line items 7, 12, and 15, you'll see the numbers are different, not by accident. Fitch's eyes moved between the 2 pages. One of his associates leaned forward without being asked. These are the bank transfer records from my father's estate account, Tariq continued, placing the next tab on the table. These funds were designated to capitalize the business. You can see the withdrawals here, and here, and here. He pointed to each one. This separate account they were transferred into belongs to Keith. The transfers were authorized using access my wife had to the account. The room had gone very still. Fitch was no longer looking at Keith. And these, Tariq said, setting the final pages down with the same unhurried steadiness, are your own emails, Mr. Fitch. Correspondence between you and Keith over the past 3 months, in which Keith describes me as a liability and asks you to finalize the restructuring before I become aware of it. One of the associates sat back slowly in his chair. Keith's mouth opened. Those are being taken out of context. The emails are unedited, Tariq said. Victor Owens, my attorney, has the originals. He also has certified copies of every document you're looking at now. Fitch set the papers down. He looked at Keith for a long moment. Then he looked at his associates. "I need to step outside," Fitch said. He didn't come back to the table. When his assistant appeared 10 minutes later to collect his copy of the restructuring proposal, Keith stared at the door like a man watching something he couldn't stop falling. The two associates said very little after that. But the industry was small. Both men knew people, the kind of people who talked. Tariq buttoned his jacket. He thanked the associates for their time. He gathered his portfolio. He did not look at Keith again. He walked out of the restaurant the same way he'd walked in. Steady, unhurried. The night air was cool outside. He loosened his tie one notch, pulled out his phone, and called Victor. "It's done," he said. "Be at the house in an hour." The porch light was on when Tariq pulled into the driveway. Andrea's car sat in its usual spot. The living room curtains glowed warm and yellow from the street. Through the window, he could see the faint shape of her moving around inside, the way she always did in the evenings, restless, always doing something with her hands when she was waiting for nothing in particular. He sat in the car for a moment, not to steady himself. He was already steady. He sat because he wanted to remember this version of the house, the last quiet minute before everything changed shape permanently. Then he got out. She heard his key in the lock and appeared in the hallway before he'd even closed the door behind him. She was wearing the cream-colored cardigan she liked on weeknights, holding a half-empty glass of wine, her hair pulled back loosely. She looked comfortable, unbothered. That told him everything about where her head was. "You're back early," she said. "How was the dinner?" "Fine," Tariq said. He set his portfolio on the hall table and shrugged off his jacket, hanging it on the hook by the door like he always did. "We should talk." Something shifted in her face. A small thing. There and gone. "Okay," she said, drawing the word out lightly. "You're being weird. What's going on?" He walked past her into the living room and sat down in the armchair by the window. He didn't reach for the portfolio yet. He just looked at her. "Sit down, Andrea." She stayed standing for a beat. Testing. Then she came and sat on the edge of the sofa, crossing her ankles, still holding her wine glass like it was something to do with her hands. "You and Keith," Tariq said. "How long?" The air in the room changed. She blinked. Her mouth opened and then closed. For 1 second, raw panic moved across her face. Real, unguarded, the kind you can't rehearse away. Then she pulled it back. Reset. "Tariq, I don't know what you—" "Don't," he said. Quiet. Flat. "Just don't." She looked at him. He looked back at her. "I was there. I walked into this house. I saw you. I said nothing. And I left. Because I wanted to understand the full picture before I did anything." He paused. "Now I have it." Her grip tightened on the wine glass. It wasn't what it looked like. It was a mistake. It only happened. 14 months, Tariq said. She stopped. He reached over to the hall table without getting up, pulled the portfolio onto his lap, and opened it. He removed a small stack of pages and set them on the coffee table between them. Hotel confirmations. 14 months of correspondence. The trip I paid for as your anniversary gift. You and Keith stayed at the same hotel. In the same room. He tapped the pages. "It's all here." Andrea's face had gone very still. She set the wine glass down on the end table slowly, like she was afraid to make a sound. "That's the affair," Tariq said. "Now let's talk about my father's money." Her eyes moved to the documents, then back to him. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You had access to the estate account," he said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. $41,000 moved across 7 transfers into a separate account. That account was used to pay off Keith's personal debts. He placed another sheet on the table. "Your name is on the authorization records." The color was leaving her face. I was trying to help. You were helping Keith with my dead father's money." He let that sit in the room for a moment, let it take up space. And while you were doing that, you were feeding Keith information from my financial records so he could make me look like a liability to our investor and push me out of the business I built. I didn't know he was going to—" She started. "Your signature is on the transfers," Tariq said. "What you knew doesn't change what you did." Andrea stood up. Her voice climbed a register. "Tariq, I made mistakes, but you're blowing this completely out of proportion. We can work through this." "Victor filed for divorce this afternoon," Tariq said. "It's already done." She stopped moving. "The filing includes full documentation of the financial misconduct," he continued. "The court will see the transfers, the account records, and your authorization signature. You'll be held personally liable for the missing funds." Victor was very thorough. She stared at him. The wine glass sat forgotten on the end table. "You've had an attorney working on this," she said slowly. "This whole time?" "Yes." "How long have you known?" "Long enough." Andrea sat back down. Not because she wanted to, because her legs seemed to decide for her. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. Her eyes were bright and wet, but no tears came. She looked like a woman finally doing math she should have done a long time ago. Tariq gathered the documents, slid them back into the portfolio, and closed it. "Be out of the house by end of the week," he said. He stood up, picked up the portfolio, and walked toward the stairs. The first legal notice arrived at Keith's apartment on a Tuesday morning. Tariq knew because Victor told him. Victor had sent it himself. A formal claim for the misappropriated inheritance funds, $41,000 plus interest, attached to a full accounting of the fraudulent expense reports and the investor correspondence, the kind of document that doesn't leave room for misunderstanding. Keith called Tariq that afternoon. Once. Tariq looked at the phone, watched the name light up on the screen, and let it ring out. He never called back. The investor, a careful man who cared deeply about his reputation, had already begun making calls of his own. Word moved fast in small professional circles. By the end of that first week, 3 people in their industry had heard some version of what happened at the dinner table. By the end of the second week, the version circulating was accurate enough to matter. Keith's remaining contacts started going quiet. Meetings got rescheduled and never confirmed. Emails took longer to get answered, and then stopped being answered at all. The boutique business had been dissolved through Victor's filings, its assets frozen pending the legal claim. Keith had nothing to show anyone, and now no one left who wanted to look. Andrea's situation moved differently, but just as surely. The court had reviewed Victor's documentation and ruled quickly on the asset question. She was ordered to repay the $41,000. Her savings were the first thing to go. Then the car she'd leased 2 years ago, the one she'd always kept cleaner than anything else she owned, because appearances had always mattered to her more than the thing underneath. A few pieces of jewelry followed. Word had spread in their neighborhood the way it always does. Not all at once, but in pieces, each piece slightly larger than the last. A comment at the grocery store. A silence at a neighborhood gathering that said more than words would have. Andrea had worked hard to build a version of herself that people admired. That version didn't survive the paperwork. Her manager called her in for a performance review 2 weeks after the divorce filing became a matter of public record. She walked out of that meeting with a formal warning and a smaller territory. The promotion she'd been angling for quietly disappeared from the conversation. Patricia Owens called Tariq on a Saturday in early November. "Come to the house Sunday," she said. "I need you here." Her tone didn't invite questions. He came. He pulled up to his mother's house at noon. The maple in her front yard had gone full red, leaves dropping in slow, steady clusters across the lawn. Patricia was on the porch when he arrived, arms crossed, watching the street with the particular stillness she used when she was holding something in. She hugged him at the door, held on an extra second. "They're already inside," she said quietly. Tariq nodded once. He'd suspected as much. The living room was arranged the way it always was for family. Chairs pulled out from corners, the good throw blanket folded over the arm of the sofa. But the air in it felt different, tight. Keith sat near the window, hands folded, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. Andrea sat on the far end of the sofa, composed on the surface, watching Tariq walk in with an expression that was working very hard at calm. Patricia stayed in the doorway. Victor stood near the hall entrance, quiet and still. Tariq sat down across from them both. He didn't rush. He let the room settle around him. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I'm not here to hear explanations. I've read everything. I know what you both did, and when you started doing it." He looked at Keith first. "You used 14 years of friendship as a door to walk through whenever it suited you. You used my home, my money, and my name, and you planned to discard all three and call it business." Keith opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," Tariq said. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. He shifted his gaze to Andrea. "You had access to everything I trusted you with. My accounts, my plans, my father's money he worked his whole life for and left to me, and you moved it, piece by piece, to cover for a man who was using you the same way he was using me." He paused. "I don't think you fully understood that part until it was too late. But understanding it doesn't change what you chose." The room was very quiet. "I'm not going to tell either of you what to do with what comes next," he said. "That's yours to figure out. But I needed you both in the same room to hear this from me directly. So there's no version of this story where you get to remember it differently." He stood up. "We're done." He looked at his mother. She gave him a single nod, her jaw set, eyes sharp and steady. He walked past both of them and into the kitchen, where Patricia had a pot of coffee going and the window above the sink looked out over her garden, still green in patches despite the season. 6 months later, on a bright Saturday in April, Tariq stood in front of a storefront with freshly painted windows and a new sign above the door. Brooks & Co's Home Staging. Est this year. Simple. Clean. His. The inheritance money, every dollar recovered through Victor's legal work, had funded it entirely. New equipment, a proper lease, a small team of 3 he'd hired himself, people who came recommended and showed up when they said they would. The turnout was good. Colleagues from the firm, a few clients he'd cultivated quietly over the past months. Victor was there, standing near the back table with a coffee cup, looking pleased in the understated way he always did when a plan came together. Bree had shown up early and helped arrange the display samples along the front windows. Tariq moved through the room, shaking hands, answering questions about the business, accepting congratulations with a steady smile. He felt present in a way he hadn't in a long time, not performing steadiness. Actually, feeling it. At one point, he stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The April air was cool and clean. The street was busy with Saturday foot traffic, people walking dogs, carrying coffee cups, moving through their regular lives without drama. He thought about rage, how much of it he'd felt in that hotel room 6 months ago, sitting on the edge of a bed, with his phone in his hands, replaying what he'd seen. How easy it would have been to drive back and blow the whole thing apart that same night. Screaming, accusations, the kind of confrontation that feels like relief for about 10 minutes and then costs you everything. He hadn't done that. He'd waited. He'd watched. He'd built a case so solid that neither of them had anywhere to stand when it finally came down. Patience hadn't felt like strength in the moment. It had felt like swallowing something sharp every single day. But it had given him this, a room full of people who respected him, a business built on recovered ground, and the quiet, permanent satisfaction of knowing he had not let anger make his decisions for him. He stood there another moment, the city moving around him, unhurried. Then he went back inside. "I hope you enjoyed that one." Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.